just come out in the United States. Congratulations. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, it's the worst natural disaster in the UN's history. It's the worst flooding in Pakistan's history. We'll talk about what's happening there with the niece of the assassinated former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto. Her name is Fatima Bhutto. Stay with us. Thanks so much. Vida Parveen here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, Pakistan is struggling to recover from one of the worst natural disasters in its history. The devastating floods that hit the country last month submerged as much as 1/5 of the nation underwater. Some 20 million people are now struggling to survive the aftermath, and the battle has now turned to aid and a global appeal for funds to help spur recovery. Meanwhile, President Asif al-Zardari is coming under criticism for his handling of the crisis.
Zardari came to power after his wife, the former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, was assassinated in December of 2007. Our next guest has been critical of the Zardari government long before the floods. Fatima Bhutto is the niece of Benazir Bhutto. Her own father, Murtaza Bhutto, was killed in 1996 in Karachi. She's written a memoir about her family. It's called Songs of Blood and Sword, a daughter's memoir. She joins us in the studio today. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Fatima.
Thank you for having me.
Start off by talking about the crisis now in Pakistan and what you feel needs to be done.
Well, we're watching devastation that is unlike anything Pakistan has ever seen. As you said, 20 million people are affected. We know that millions of homes have been destroyed. The agricultural food belt of the country has been submerged. And we have 6 million children at risk of fatal diseases like cholera, dysentery, diarrhea, and many millions more in desperate need of food aid. We also know that this is a crisis that ought to have been contained. It could have been contained. According to Transparency International, 70% of World Bank funds given to Pakistan for dam maintenance were siphoned off. This is the face of corruption in Pakistan, and it's a disaster that we're going to spend years recovering from.
And you've called this flood Zardari's Katrina. Could you explain?
Well, you know, that I said that really a week into the floods. It's much larger than Zardari's Katrina now. At the time that the floods were raging, President Zardari embarked on a publicity tour, really. He went to Dubai, he went to France, where he visited a personal chateau in his family's name. They went to England.
This is your uncle you're talking about.
By marriage, I hasten to add. But yes, and we also know that the criticism that was leveled at him for leaving the country at a time of dire need was not enough to ground the president. He traveled again to Russia weeks later. It's been criminal the way that the Pakistani government has handled these floods, to the point that the BBC even reported that government officials who deigned to visit flood-affected areas were physically assaulted.
The beginning of your memoir, Songs of Blood and Sword, you're talking about some of the casualties from U.S. drone attacks. And today, at the top of the show today, I read this headline about Bob Woodward's new book called Obama's Wars, where he's reporting CIA drone strikes in Pakistan have killed many Westerners, including some U.S. citizens, as part of the secret U.S. war inside Pakistan. How the former head of the CIA, Michael Hayden, disclosed the killings of Americans to Pakistani President Asif Ali Zardari in November of 2008, days after a deadly attack in the tribal area of North Waziristan. The names of the American killed in the drone attacks have not been released. During the meeting, Zardari reportedly gave the Bush administration the green light to carry out more drone attacks inside Pakistan, saying, "Kill the seniors. Collateral damage worries you Americans. It does not worry me."
It clearly doesn't. We know that in 2009, some 700 Pakistanis were killed in drone attacks. We know that so far in 2010, around 300 people have been killed. These are all nameless, faceless Pakistanis. The media will say they are largely civilians, but I wonder if they are not all civilians. They are unindicted, they are unconvicted. We know that at the height of the floods, America launched 2 drone attacks. We know that last week, within 24 hours, they launched 3 drone attacks. There were double drone attacks just days ago. President Obama has been enthusiastic in his use of employing predator drone attacks, and President Zardari has been very pliable in allowing them to come and kill Pakistani citizens.
Now, you've been outspoken in your criticism of the U.S. role in Pakistan from almost the beginning of its involvement in Pakistan. Yeah. Could you talk about the analysis that you've reached about the damage that the United States has done to your country?
Well, Pakistan is a young country. It's only 63 years young this year. You will find, though, that every single one of Pakistan's military dictatorships has been funded and supported militarily, financially, and politically by the White House in America. America has always been a great friend to Pakistan's military regimes. They have always been great friends to Pakistan's autocratic and oppressive governments. The Zardari government has launched several censorship initiatives since being in power for the last 2 years, including the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, which makes it a crime to spoof or satirize the person of the president. It makes having an email address not registered in your full name an offense worth 6 months in jail. And yet we see Secretary of State Hillary Clinton come to Pakistan and praise the freedom of the Pakistani media. Unfortunately, it's always been a bit of a dirty relationship between the two countries.
Your memoir tells the story of your country through your own family story. You're the granddaughter of Zulkifar Ali Bhutto, who was assassinated, who was killed. He was Prime Minister of Pakistan. Yeah. Your father, Mir Murtaza, you begin the book, or you talk in the book, in September of 1996. You are 14 years old. You're in Karachi, and your father is assassinated along with others. Tell us your family story.
Well, it is a violent history, and it shares that violence with the country. We know that Pakistan has a history of political assassinations, a history of assassinations of public figures, but not just of public figures, of journalists, of activists, of lawyers, that carries on every day. And the Bhutto family has been at the center of that violence. It has suffered it, and it has perpetuated it. And Songs of Blood and Sword is about that trajectory and about a country that seems to include violence as part of its political ethic.
When did your grandfather become Prime Minister, Zulkifar Ali Bhutto?
Well, he became, he ascended to the highest office in the land after the partition of Pakistan in 1971, and he was the country's first democratically elected head of state, and he won an election again. He was returned to the office, and after that overthrown and put to death while the rest of the world watched as Pakistan's democratically elected leadership was unseated in a bloody coup, and a coup that would Islamicize and brutalize Pakistan in a way that we have never recovered from.
Now, this violence and civil strife that you talk about, the strife has occurred within your own family, and that in some senses you have at one point accused Benazir Bhutto of being involved in your father's death. Could you talk about that?
At the time that my father was killed, his sister Benazir was the prime minister for the second time in Pakistan, and she had empowered the police forces in the city of Karachi, the police forces and the security agencies under the aegis of Operation Cleanup, to, quote, clean up Karachi. And it was in that period, that year-and-a-half period that Operation Cleanup was in effect, that some 3,000 men were murdered in the city of Karachi. They were political activists, they were journalists, they were opponents of the government, and they were all killed in extrajudicial murders. My father was one of those men. He was a very strong critic of the government. He was an elected member of parliament. And he spoke very vocally and very sharply about his sister Benazir's corruption, about the human rights abuses. And really, 14 years ago, almost to the week, he was assassinated along with 6 other people outside our home.
You were close to your aunt, to Benazir Bhutto, when you were growing up.
Yes.
You appealed to her when your father was imprisoned. How long was he in prison? Why? What was he charged with? And what did your aunt say? She was prime minister.
After their father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, was overthrown, all the Bhutto children lobbied for clemency for their father. And at the time, it was Murtaza and his brother, his younger brother, Shahnawaz, who traveled around the world. They met senators in America. They went